ADHD family. I'm Yakini coming to you from ADHD Love. Welcome to another episode of ADHD Love Parent Talk, where I talk to different guests and we talk about different aspects of ADHD. And the hope is that you will have information that you can put in your toolbox that you can pull out later as you're moving through your ADHD journey. So today I am so excited to have Taucha. She is what I call a yoga expert. And I really connected to her. I found her on Instagram and I really connected to her because yoga later in life became a very key part of my life. I don't do it all the time today, but there was a period of time where I was struggling with certain situations, dealing with, work and life. And yoga was a piece that truly centered me during that time. And then we also use it for my ADHD child. So we actually use yoga as part of his practice to get him ready and prepared for classes. So I was very excited when I saw that she does yoga, and I wanted her to talk through how does it tie to ADHD. So first of all, welcome, Taucha. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So what I wanted to do is start off with just tell the audience a little bit about yourself. I saw your story the other day, so I'm excited for you to talk about that. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Why do you know ADHD so well? And then how does it connect to yoga?
So my name's Taucha. I'm Canadian. I am the oldest of 4 kids, had a big family, and my professional background, I'm a speech therapist. I spent some time beforehand. I have a background in psychology. I very briefly did grad school in neuroscience and then realized academia was not my jam and became a speech therapist. Did that for 8 years, practiced yoga all the way through for 15 years and then got my certification. And now I'm also a yoga teacher. So
that is very cool. That is very cool. So when did you actually get diagnosed? So when did you find out that you had ADHD, and then what was your diagnosis?
I found out when I was 31, so that was about a little over 3 years ago. I kind of suspected it for a while. Like my whole life, I suspected a vague something. Something seemed vaguely a little off because easy things seemed really hard for me, and I didn't know why. And then as I got into speech therapy, when I learned about dyslexia, I'm like, oh, I have that. And then I definitely have that. And then I was having a really hard time at work as a clinician, but it wasn't with the clinical side. It was with like the admin side. It was like scheduling clients and keeping up with notes and things like that. And it was just, at first, I just thought it was because I was a new clinician. And then after years, it just never, ever got easier. The other parts did, and that didn't. And then I actually heard about women in ADHD getting diagnosed late on the radio, on a Canadian radio station called CBC. It was a show called The Current. And I was listening to it and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is also me. And so I suspected it for years. And my colleague also happened to listen to that same episode at the same time. And the next day she asked me if I had listened to it. And I said, yeah. And she's like, that sounded a lot like you. I'm like, oh. So I did a lot of research, eventually got a diagnosis. And it was, I had a mixed reaction about it, honestly, when I got it. But yeah, only because I was excited, I felt validated and like finally had an explanation, but then also scared because I had done so much research on it. If I had somehow manipulated the testing and the process to get a diagnosis just so I would have an explanation. If that makes any sense.
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah, and I was just like, because I just wanted a reason something to explain why things were tough. And I did have the answer, but then I was like, what if I just made it for myself? So it actually took me a really long time to really accept the diagnosis fully because of that, which actually was a big barrier to treating myself. Because if you don't really believe that you have it, why would you really dive deep down into treatment, right? Exactly. So it was a big part of the kind of the recovery or the management was getting over that first.
That's really interesting. And, because people say that though, once you know, right? Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting to hear your perspective of, okay, so I did my research. Did I answer the questions in a certain way to make sure that I got the diagnosis that I wanted to have? Or is that
Yeah.
really me, right? And
Yeah,
so, but
totally.
what's really interesting is, when my daughter went through testing, I simply told her, just be as honest as possible. So then that way they can give you the proper diagnosis, whether you are ADHD or not.
Yeah.
And for that exact reason, I didn't want to go into reasons. I didn't want to put anything in her head. I just wanted her just to be honest, and they would tell us yay or nay, right? And I thought
Yeah.
that that's really interesting that you brought that up.
Yeah. Well, it's because it took me years to get diagnosed, like to actually just make myself go and do it.
Mm-hmm.
And also to find a place where I could do it. And so, I don't know, there was a reluctance, but I don't know, but there was like a piece, I'm like, I still want to know. I want to know a little bit more. So I read a lot. And I swear, it was like reading my own bio. Like parts of like when you read your first ADHD book, you're like, this is me. Oh my gosh, I'm like, I found my people. It's so exciting. But then I was really scared that I wanted to belong to that group so badly, and
Yeah.
that I wanted an explanation so badly that I just made it happen. But my husband will tell you, oh, I'm so ADHD. Like so ADHD.
Oh, that is
It's
hilarious. That
good
is
fit.
hilarious.
Yeah.
So now you're 31, you have this diagnosis. So what
Yeah.
was your next step? What path did you take just to help you manage certain situations better?
Yeah. Well, after that, so I'd already done a bunch of reading. I then like found some podcasts and listened to some podcasts as well. So I could keep learning cause I did a lot of driving. And then I joined a cognitive behavioral therapy group for ADHD at my, at the pilot, like the hospital where I got diagnosed. And I did some medication trials. Took a long time to find something that was a good fit, but finally found a good fit. And it just made me really realize that also ADHD, like I already knew this, that ADHD is not just about medication and just about counseling. It was about like, you have to manage your whole environment. Like it's very holistic.
Right.
And it's not, because it's also just not about attention. It's about emotions. It's about memory. It's about regulation. It's about just so much. Like what doesn't it touch? It's
Right.
part of relationships, it's part of everything. So it was actually just kind of like, it was like this kind of sitting back and taking more perspective of my life and realizing like how far ADHD reached, and then realizing like why the things I tried before didn't work, or why I always felt like I was in this frantic hunt for a solution. Like it just the initial part was really just letting life make sense, and just like seeing my past in a new frame of like a new filter, through a new filter, and like stuff that had happened just suddenly made so much sense. And it was a lot also about just like processing. That was really
Mhm.
like a big part of getting the diagnosis, was like processing, like letting it settle, kind of gently folding it into my identity now, and then seeking out resources and people um, to help me out through the process. Because it's, again, like I said, it's like a far-reaching part of your life.
Yeah.
You're not the only one impacted by it. Everybody in your life is impacted by it. So it also meant telling the people I cared a lot about, like, just so you know, like I have ADHD and I'm going to do this, and this, and it might be hard. So please help me figure it out. So surrounding yourself with supports is really important too.
So let's talk a little bit about medication. So,
Sure.
a person that has, so again, you discover this later on in life, and there are some adults who feel, okay, I've discovered it, now I know. I've dealt with it this long. Do I really need to get on to the medication side? So what are your thoughts? What was going through your mind when that topic came up?
Oh yeah, that's such a big part. I think getting diagnosed as an adult is like, well, I made it this far, and it was a lot of reaction for people too. Like, well, what does it matter now? Like, you made it this far, and that was also a barrier to getting a diagnosis. Period.
Right.
Um, so I, with medication, I think at that point, by the time I like was willing to go and get the diagnosis, I was just so tired of struggling, like just so tired.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to, like, I'd never really wanted to try medications, even actually when I was going through the diagnosis. I'm like, I'll just use the strategies. I don't want meds. I want to do this on my own. Like, I'm very stubborn. I want to do this on my own. And, I'm so stubborn. Then I realized, like you don't have to. Medications also are not permanent. I can give them a try. I can see how they feel. And you, as I acquire more strategies and get more proficient in a more holistic approach to my ADHD, I can decide not to take them anymore. Like, they're totally in my control.
Right.
So once I kind of came to that realization, like, these are in my control, this is my choice. The struggle doesn't have to be this hard, and it also won't be forever. So once I realized all the parts of it that I actually had control over, it wasn't really a big deal. It was just something to try. And some people don't find medications they like. And that sucks. That's the thing about medications is really tough with ADHD, is you can't be guaranteed what's going to work, right?
Right.
We're not patient. We're not patient. We don't want to try a lot. We want it to work right away.
Right.
So that was a hard part. So I had to be willing to just be patient and give some stuff a try. But yeah, and I also just had to also accept that there are other parts of my health where I accept medications. There are other parts of my well-being where I accept support. Why am I going to decide that this part of my life, which affects all those other things, isn't important enough to try anything I can? Why would I do that? So, like I said, like, medication is a very controversial thing. Lots of people, yeah, it's very controversial. I made the choice that was best for me, and all I can recommend for other people is just to make sure you make the choice that's best for you, and that when you look at the reasons for trying or not trying, that they are your reasons and no one else's.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably the biggest issue, right? Is because people think, what does my mother think about that? Or what would my friends think about that? It's not about how can I make myself more whole as a person so I can be better for my family, for my children, in my relationship. It's about you. It's not about what other people think about you and your decisions. Now, to your point, sharing it with them, especially having a supportive community, I think that is really important. But if they give you feedback that you don't like or do not agree with, it doesn't mean you have to follow that feedback, right? So
totally. Yeah. And again, like, you have control. You can decide if you like that opinion or not. You can decide if that's something you hadn't considered before or not. And if it's something that needs more looking into. And if you decide, no, you know what, this is still the best choice for me, then that's fine. Like, you are in control. And that's what I really try to remind myself or tell other people about, is medications, they're not going to control you. You're the one in control of them. You can do with them whatever you want.
I love it. So what would your, outside of that, just general advice? So a person, especially parents, I mean, I know you're not a parent, but what I wanted just to get your thought process is, especially parents, a lot of us, even me included, I was just recently diagnosed. And the reason why I even decided to go through the testing is because both of my children were diagnosed, right? So it's like, yeah, it's a genetic thing. So am I the person, right? There was a lot of connection to the research that I was, reading about. And it was amazing how I was connected to some of these things that I was researching. So the bottom line is, what is your advice to those who just found out as an adult? And, you had mentioned their decisions, whether they do something or not, is going to affect one way or the other their children, their husband, their partner. So what is your just overall, as a person that just found out late, what is your overall tips and tricks and thought processes for them?
Yeah, I think the thing I would recommend, like, doing as much reading or listening to podcasts as you can. I feel like, especially because, like, ADHD is funny because we use it so, like, casually in society to describe, like, a very set type of person. So by the time we're diagnosed, we still don't even really understand what it is. We still have like that hyperactive boy bouncing off the walls in our head, right? We don't realize all the other parts that are influenced and how, and like historically our life was influenced by this by this diagnosis. So I think for people who are just diagnosed later in life, like just read as much as you can about it. Um, Reach out to professionals, find professionals, coaches. I would recommend a coach so much, and a therapist so much, because I'm sure there's a lot of pain, so much pain, especially for women, because we're more often misdiagnosed and often more diagnosed with depression or anxiety before we get down to the underlying cause of that depression and anxiety, right? So there's a lot of stuff to deal with by the time you're diagnosed later, a lot of stuff to clear out. So do a lot of research, read, listen to podcasts, and hire all the support you can, the professional support you can to get you through it. And also try and get in a practice of just being nicer to yourself, because that was a lot, and that's still like an ongoing process, like layer after layer after layer of things I realized I beat myself up for. And just learning how to show yourself some compassion. Because also as a parent, the more it's like compassion is proportionate to how much you show yourself. Like the amount of compassion you show other people is limited by how much you show yourself. And if you're not showing yourself any compassion, you're not going to have a whole lot for your kids who are driving you nuts on a bad night's sleep. You know, like it needs to be an ongoing practice for yourself, because then it kind of bleeds out to other parts of your life and the other people of your life.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I like that. I like that. So those who, because you're a child of someone, so those who just discovered that their children have ADHD, what are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think about this a lot because I'm planning on having a family soon. And obviously, because of genetics, I'm probably going to have an ADHD kid. That's the way to go. So, the way things work. That's how I got it. So I think about this a lot if I have an ADHD kid. So obviously I can't give advice because I'm not a parent, but this is what I think of. Kids learn so much from watching, from their environment, from what is modeled for them and to them. So I really want to make sure that I'm very open about my diagnosis. I'm very open about my struggles. I talk about my strategies openly and show them the strategies openly. I would also, as my kid is diagnosed, this is just what I'm planning. I'm not being prescriptive here. But if my kid is diagnosed, I want to be able to explain that to them as soon as possible. Like I don't want to wait for the right moment to tell them, because there isn't really a right moment.
Right.
And the more it's just kind of gently, kindly, lovingly folded into their self-concept, the less likely they are to have shame build around it. And the more likely they are to just have to reach out and ask for help when they need it. And if you model that kindness, and if you keep them involved and keep them informed all along, they'll be more receptive to information and to recommendations, or who knows, maybe they won't. They have free will. Yeah. But then also not taking that personally.
Yeah, I mean, there are probably periods of their life they're like, whatever.
Yeah, totally. They can totally do that. I have a friend, she says you do your best parenting when you're not a parent. So I have to also keep that in mind.
So funny. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
Oh,
so let's see. All I can do is like model it as best as I can. Be very open, because I don't want to create any shame. I don't want it to be the secret. And be open about my meds, be open about my strategies, show them how to use a calendar, probably use visuals very early on in life, whiteboards freaking everywhere, picture schedules everywhere. That's just practical things that I hold in my mind. That's
good. That's good. And then, being flexible as you go through the process, right? Because you got to start somewhere. The idea is not being, stringent. It's like, okay, it has to be this way, and just being flexible about it and move with your child. You know, you
Totally.
may have two and one goes this direction, the other one goes this direction. You know, you're just,
Yeah,
know.
totally. And just because we have the same diagnosis doesn't mean it's going to look the same.
Right.
Like that's the other thing about ADHD. It's like so dynamic. It's so different in everybody, and it's different from situation to situation.
Right.
So, like, and in different phases of your life. So, keeping that in mind too. Just being just open to whatever we face, and just be willing to try anything.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, very cool. So I want to get into the yoga piece. So,
Yeah.
tell us about how, I mean, we talked a little bit about in the beginning, but what just made you say, you know what, this is the direction I have to go. And this is what I really want to center part of my life around. So what happened?
Yeah, I haven't. It's funny because I started off as a big skeptic. So I had been practicing yoga for 15 years, and I started because my dad recommended it in my second year of university, because I was just a stress case because I was undiagnosed. Things were really hard. I was in university. I was busy. So he said, you should do yoga to calm down. So I started, and I loved it. It was, I took time for myself. It was physical exercise, which we know is so good for ADHD. So I stuck with it because it definitely gave me, it benefited me physically and mentally just to move. But I was at that point, still very skeptical about all the other parts that come with it, because yoga is like, it's not exercise. Like here in, North America, we just kind of think of it as exercise, right? We see it in gyms and studios, and it's just movement, but it's not. It's a lifestyle, and it's got thousands of years of history and like an exploration of the consciousness to back it up. And but I wasn't willing to accept those parts, and like, it's just exercise, like get on with class. Like, I don't want to sit still listening to my mind. It's too noisy. So I didn't buy into that part for years and years and years. And then, but I knew they were there. And then I did my master's in speech therapy, and my supervisor for my graduating research project wanted me to do stuttering and mindfulness. And I was like, this is the most West Coast thesis I've ever heard. Okay, fine. But again, I was skeptical. Yeah, like, okay, fine. Sure. But I'm like, mindfulness, okay. So that's when I knew, like, I'd heard of it and knew of meditation and mindfulness through yoga. But this was the first time I actually looked at papers on it and research on it. And I was like, oh, this is legit stuff. Like, there's research to actually show how beneficial this is. And so that that opened my mind to the other parts. And then when I started researching ADHD and learning, like, we need to practice more self-reflection, and we need more internal awareness of our senses and going on. Because we'll get into focus mode for like 3 hours and realize, like, oh my gosh, I need to pee like now, because we have no awareness of our body, because we just focus. And so I started learning about more holistic areas, and saw so many matches between like yoga and the other areas of yoga other than the poses and ADHD. And so I did my yoga teacher training, and it was just yoga was just so much bigger than I ever could have imagined. And just like ADHD was so much bigger than I ever could have imagined. And so yoga, like I said, I was only first initially bought into the physical part, which on its own is very beneficial to ADHD. Moving is very beneficial. But then all the other parts, like, that's just a teeny tiny little piece. There are like 8 different limbs in yoga. And they include things like observances and behaviors, like ethical guidelines on how to behave with other people, and ethical guidelines on how to treat yourself. And they all just lined up so well with any self-help book I've ever read. And then also breathing exercises to help energize and focus, or help calm and ground. And also self-awareness of your body, turning your senses in and becoming more aware of what's going on. Like, that's so important for people with ADHD. and to like, because all of our senses are out here all the time, just
Yeah.
pulling information in. And it's a good practice to learn how to pull it in and observe yourself. And then also just like mindfulness, like just self-reflection, just pretty much anything non-medicinal that can treat ADHD was in like the whole inclusive idea of what yoga is. And I try to implement it in my life and I fail at it every day, but it is a practice. Like people who actually practice yoga dedicate and devote their whole life to yoga. And that's why it's so complicated. There's just so much. And that's why it's so hard to actually teach it properly in here in the Western world, because you can't really, people come to a studio class or gym class and they don't really, that's not exactly what they came for or what they're ready for. But I really, my goal is to try and teach more of the aspects of yoga so the people who come to my classes learn more than just physical movement to benefit them, but also like more self-awareness, more principles of how to interact with themselves, more principles of how to interact with others, in a very kind, gentle way. It's like, it's just holistic. The whole thing is just so holistic. And it so aligns with everything I've learned about ADHD and management.
Wow, that's a whole nother level. I mean, it's you're right, that is bigger.
It's so much bigger. I know. I'm like, how do I condense this to answer your question? But it's
awesome.
huge.
Yeah, because it's really interesting. When I do exercises in general, I think about the health, or like I said earlier, the centering of it. I don't really think about the history and why it is so important. And like you said, it being bigger than just the exercise piece. I just know how I feel, when I'm done. And I just know how it just takes me or calms me. If I do it in the morning, for example, how it calms me for the rest of the day. Or if I just do, really simple breathing exercises or mindfulness exercises at night, how well I sleep. I just know those little things.
Yeah.
But see that there's all these other pieces. That's amazing.
Yeah, there's so many pieces. And like I said, like I'm not going to be, I'm not going to be that yogi who is living all by themselves in a mountain kind of thing. Like I'm not going to be that person. I won't expect any of the people who come to my classes to be that person, but I do think all of the principles of yoga resonate so much with things that we feel as ADHDers and things that we need to learn to manage ourselves, and also like resonate with pretty much any self-help book I've ever read. I feel like things like match up word for word with like, Brene Brown books and things like that. And so those little pieces that you talk about are so super important still, like breathing. That's pranayama is the breathing exercises we know in yoga, and it is guiding energy, prana, the life force, through our channels. And you don't need to really understand all of that to still benefit from the breathing exercises, right? But it's still nice to have that little piece to know where it came from. But it's just, it was just when I was in my training, my mind was just like exploding and expanding. And I'm like, ADHDers need this. They need it. They need it so bad. All of it.
Yeah. So if somebody just wanted to get started, just, starting with the basics, and right now, a lot of us are still stuck at home. What are some of your recommendations?
Yeah, if you want to get started, where to begin? Yeah, everybody has different restrictions. So if you wanted to, like every province, every state, every country.
Exactly.
Yeah. So in some places, their studios are open. So if you are in a place where studios are open, go to a studio. And I would recommend going to a studio that's small. Because then you can have small classes and there's more attention from the teacher to give you adjustments so that you have a good, strong foundation to build off of. And some studios also have like beginner workshops. And I would totally recommend going to like a beginner workshop before just kind of throwing yourself into classes so that you have a good foundation. Online, it's so different, but also online, I mean, there's tons of stuff on YouTube. But because of COVID right now, I know that studios and gyms are struggling so badly. So if you can, and if you have the means, I would recommend checking out the studios in your area, or even just finding yoga teachers that you like and see if they're teaching online and join their classes. because studios are just, they're having to go right now. It's really tough. So if you have the means, take classes from a studio, take their online classes, do their online memberships. See if they also have online workshops for beginners as well. Live classes are great. And classes where they also either have the cameras on so the teacher can see you, or stick around to answer questions would be great. So like for my classes, I stay 20 minutes after, because I'm too far away from the screen to give people adjustments in real time. But I stay for 20 minutes after so that people can ask me questions, or if something was painful or the modifications I told them about didn't work well for them, I can give them other recommendations. Or I can even, they can turn their camera on and I can see what they're doing and give them adjustments from there. I think that's really important. Yeah. Sorry, I'm so rambly.
No, you're fine.
Okay.
Good, it's good stuff. So if somebody says it's just too hard, or because yoga is not easy, right? It is not an easy moment. Like I never understood and appreciated how hard it can be. So they say it's just too hard, or the opposite. I didn't do yoga for a long time because I thought it was too slow. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And having to pause and sit there, because I like, the moving exercises, the really hardcore exercises like kickboxing.
Yeah.
Now I put it in between. So I have, I have my workout routine for the week, and then, yoga is kind of like my self-care. So
totally.
What do you say to them? And, in terms of just not giving up, what are your thoughts?
Starting is the hardest part. If you can just get yourself over that. There are actually all kinds of different types of yoga, though. There's yin yoga. So if you are really looking for something that's very calming, like if you're really trying to get yourself calm and grounded, there are different varieties and styles. I would recommend like a restorative practice or a yin practice if you want something very slow paced to counteract any like very active exercise you do. If you really want to get more exercise, there's like Kundalini and like power flow classes or vinyasa classes are a good fit for you. If the part that's hard for you is being slow, then there are options that aren't slow. Okay. And if the part that's hard for you is the physical requirements for it, then there are also practices that are not as physical. Okay. So it depends what part is hard for you. So there's a lot of variety, and also a very big movement right now to make yoga in general more accessible. So a lot more modification, which is also the importance of going to more of a live class, because then after class you can ask, how do I modify this? Okay. But the hardest part is always just like going. Like I would just do a little bit of research, find someone you resonate with, and make a plan on your schedule to just go. Like, I see you, ADHD, or like, I know you need a plan. Like, you need to do it. But on your schedule, it needs to be concrete. If you're just vaguely going to promise yourself you'll do it one day, it'll never happen. We know this. So just make a concrete plan to do it. Because once you're there, you never regret it. You never regret taking that time. It's getting over that initial hump. That's the hardest part.
Makes sense. Okay. So just in general, do you have any recommendations in terms of resources, be it on ADHD itself, just some things that you really connected to, or on yoga? So you did mention, there's just, they can do their research. But if there's anything that really hits you, can you recommend those areas too?
Yeah, sure. Podcasts. I listened to the podcast. I think it's like ADHD. It's the ADDitude magazine podcast.
Oh, okay.
I think it's like ADDitude. I think it's like ADDitude. I think they're just a play on words. But it's the ADDitude magazine podcast. That one has a lot that's good. It has a lot of professionals come in and do talks, and it's got a lot of stuff. It's focused a lot on kids, but it has some stuff on adults as well. Okay. So that's a good one. My I have an ADHD coach that I just love to pieces, Kristen, and she has a podcast as well called the I Have ADHD podcast. That one's really good for adults. So you parents out there who need some resources, that would be great. And then also like the classic books, you know, like Delivered from Distraction, and oh, I can't remember the first one. Delivered by Distraction is the first. Oh, my memory. Gone. I don't know. Right. First one.
Yeah. You can send it to me and I'll stick it in later. That's fine.
Yeah. And then for yoga books, if you want to look a little bit more into like more yoga philosophy, over like the principles I was talking about of like the ethical guidelines, that sounds like super restrictive, and but it's not. It's like there's a book called the Yamas and Niyamas, because that's what they're called. Like, actually, I just have it here, so I'll just show you.
Perfect.
It's very little, which is amazing. And I've read it like twice, which is impressive for someone with ADHD and someone with dyslexia. So I've read it twice. The Yamas and Niyamas by Deborah Adele. And it talks about the ethical guidelines really of treating yourself and treating each other. Things like nonviolence, which is not just about not punching people, but about just like thinking kindly to yourself and to others. And then also satya, which is truthfulness, but it's not just about not lying, but about just being your honest full self and not masking, and how to cope with and deal with people who can't really handle you as you truly are, and realizing like that's not really ultimately not important, you know? And so I just love this book for that. And those were like the big pieces that I always like weave into themes in yoga class, because they're so applicable. So those are my resources, I guess. Those podcasts, those books, and that book. And I would also recommend like get a coach if you can, just somebody who can hold you accountable, and someone who can also really just understand what you're going through, but be objective. Right. It's so important. So those would be my recommendations.
Okay, perfect. So any last minute thoughts, comments, anything we didn't cover, any last minute tips or tricks?
Just breathe. Just give yourself some space. Give yourself some time to breathe, and just be patient and compassionate with yourself. Like I said, ADHD reaches into all parts of our life. It's very dynamic, and our lives are very dynamic, which makes it even more challenging. So just be patient with yourself and take breaks when you need to, and show yourself some compassion.
Nice. And so if people wanted to ask you any further questions, can you share how to get a hold of you? So your Instagram handle, and then if you have a website, can you share that too?
Yeah, sure. My Instagram handle is ADHD, is at ADHD Yoga, the period in between. So ADHD period yoga. And then I have a website. It is ADHDyoga.ca, because I'm Canadian. So don't try and do .com, you'll never find me. So .ca, ADHDyoga.ca, it's my website, my classes, and my schedule and stuff up there. And also my email address is on the website. It's my first name, so Taucha at ADHDyoga.ca. Do you have any questions?
And Tasha, do you do classes on a daily basis, or like how often do you usually do your classes?
I'm actually, right now, I do my classes Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I do two each day, but I'm actually next week changing my schedule. In the new year, I have some new plans coming. I want to do like an online, like a beginner's workshop, like a 2-day workshop for beginners, so that they don't feel as intimidated, so it doesn't seem as hard, like you said. So I have those plans in the works. So I'm actually changing my schedule starting next week to only teach 3 times live a week. But I also do special events and stuff like that. I just wanted to make more room to create a more long-term plan, taking my own advice, giving myself some space to breathe and think and collect. So as of next week, I'll be teaching 3 classes a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday.
And then in 2021, you're going to have some new things happening.
Yeah. Okay. 2021, I'll have a regular live schedule, but I'll have more special events, more workshops, and I'm also kind of hoping to have guest teachers. So nice. That's my plan. Yeah.
That'll be fun.
Yeah, I'm excited. And workshops and things like that. I want it to be a little bit more like broader. So That's my big plan. We'll see how it goes.
All right, I'm rooting for you.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank
very
you.
good. Well, it was so wonderful meeting you, Tasha. I mean, I truly appreciate your time and your knowledge. I mean, like I said, yoga has just been a huge impact on my life. So, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. So I definitely appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. It was so fun.
All right, Tasha, have a wonderful day.
Bye.